Hi everyone. I just thought I'd do a quick video specifically on Intune and Autopilot. We're getting asked a lot by our clients, how can we manage computers when people are working remotely? How can we make sure they're compliant? What if we need to make a configuration change? What if we need to put out software? So I thought I'd do a quick video on Intune and Autopilot to show you how it's quite straightforward in most cases to have computers that can be managed remotely, stuff that you could drop ship to your users even if they're self-isolating, and that lessens the risk to you, lessens the risk to the business and to the member of staff, especially if you can just drop ship kit to them with no need for them to come into the office to collect it or to configure it or have to talk to IT in order to get it set up. So I thought I would run through a brief demo. This is our dev environment, which is an MSDN tenancy, it's got Microsoft 365 E5 licensing across the board, which comes as part of MSDN along with some demo data. The only thing that you don't get with the MSDN tenancies is the phone system calling plan functionality, but if we ever needed that, we could always add it. So for the purposes of what I'm going to show you today, this is probably very similar to what you would get. In terms of licensing for Intune Autopilot, you need to make sure that your licenses are configured correctly. So you need to make sure you've got licenses for the users, but you also need to make sure that the device aspect is licensed. So you will normally end up with a combination of Microsoft 365 either business or E3 or E5 depending on what your licensing is, but you then need to add the EMS E3 or E5 on top of that for the devices, and that covers you for the Intune license. It covers you for Azure AD Premium P1 or P2 depending on what you do, and also covers you for a few other things like Azure Information Protection, which is quite handy, and some other functionality. If you're running E3 or E5 licenses and you need to add the EMS component, then take a look at the Microsoft 365 licenses rather than the Office 365 licenses, because the Microsoft 365 license contains both the Office 365 license and the EMS license. So you get both, and it can work out a bit cheaper in some cases. So I'm going to jump straight into our tenancy here. This is our Cloudable Dev Azure AD tenancy here. It's just a standard Azure AD tenancy. Because we're E5, we're running Azure AD Premium P2, but P1 is absolutely fine. So anyone who's ever done anything with Autopilot before knows that it's built around primarily dynamic groups for what you need to do. I shall pick this old one out here because anyone who's ever dealt with Autopilot before probably recognizes this dynamic device query here. So this is certainly how things used to be configured, and certainly a lot of the documentation sort of 12 months ago, 18 months ago was telling people this was how to configure Autopilot devices. So a dynamic device group query with device ID, physical ID contains ZTDID, which is great. That would pick up all autopiloted devices in your organization, and then you could apply compliance policies, configuration policies, all of that kind of thing to them. Absolutely no problem at all. But what if you don't want to apply policies to all devices? What if you've got an accounts department who require the 32-bit version of Office, whereas all your other users, you want to have the 64-bit version of Office for performance? What if your IT guys need a VPN, but your normal users don't? So in some cases, the dynamic device query, this ZTDID query, isn't really good enough. It's a one size fits all, and it's not going to allow us to separate between different devices. So in our case, we're going to swap this around a bit, and we're going to use what's called the order ID, or the group tag field. Now that is a field which is free text within Intune. You can set it to whatever you want. I have found that I don't think it's a requirement, but I found that it does tend to work better sometimes with the dynamic groups if you make sure you're matching case. So I don't think it's technically case sensitive, but I have found times when it's set up in Intune as one case and in Azure AD as another case, that things haven't dropped into the right groups correctly. So we're going to use the order ID field. So if we jump into Intune quickly and we go to our device enrollment, Windows enrollment, that's where we want to be, and into devices. Let's give that a refresh, make sure we're up to date. So this is a virtual machine that I dumped in. I'm going to show you this on a couple of Hyper-V virtual machines. I dumped in a test device earlier. I've got two other machines that I'm going to add in, but I'll do that as part of this video so you can see the process and what happens. And you can see one of the fields you have here is group tag. So that's assigned a group tag of autopilot, and because it's assigned a group tag of autopilot, if we go to my other dynamic group, order ID autopilot, so we should see there we are, it's dropped in as a member, and that then allows me to apply policies and a whole bunch of other stuff via Intune. And it also, better than that, allows me to split out different departments within my organization. I can treat engineering differently to IT, differently to accounts. I can deploy different applications automatically, or I can allow or disable certain Windows features depending on what it is that department requires. So I prefer doing it this way. The other way will work. If you just need to roll out 20 machines as quickly as you can, then the other way will work, and you can convert from the other way to this way by changing the order ID fields around or the group tag fields. You can do it manually. There's also some PowerShell that will let you do it via Graph API. So you can PowerShell into Graph API, and that allows you then to manipulate this field en masse for some devices. So without further ado, let me get into a virtual machine. Here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a bog standard Windows 10 Pro VM that I've built. It's not hooked up to AD, it's not configured, I've not done anything with it at all. It's just running on my machine. I've given it 8 gig of RAM and a couple of cores just to make sure that it's performant. But I've not done anything apart from next through the normal OEM setup wizard that you get when you install Windows. So let's get this into our tenancy, and then we can start doing some cool stuff with it. So I'm going to launch PowerShell. I'm going to launch PowerShell as an administrator, because one of the first things I'm going to do, just for the sake of expediency, is disable the execution policy. It's not really good practice, but just for the sake of, because we're going to reset this machine anyway in about 2 minutes, it just makes our life a bit quicker. So I'm going to install a few PowerShell modules here, just because I know the script that we're about to run has them as prerequisites, so may as well get them installed anyway. So we're going to install, the first thing I've done here is install the Azure AD PowerShell module, yes to all. And the next module I'm going to install is the PowerShell Intune Auth module. So that should just be doing its installation now. Yep. PS Intune Auth. You can script all this. The other thing that you can do is when you buy your devices for the vendor, you can ask them to autopilot them for you. Then you don't have to go through this step. I'm only going through this step because these are virtual machines, so they've never not been configured before. They've not touched a group policy or a domain controller or anything like that. If you had a whole bunch of on-premise machines, you could do an Azure AD hybrid join, deploy policy to them that way, and that would be another way of achieving the autopilot process that you can do without having to visit every single machine. So next thing we're going to do is install a script. So this is a script on the PowerShell gallery called Upload Windows Autopilot Device Info. Again, install please. So that's just installed now. So now that script's installed, we're going to call that script with a couple of parameters, and that is going to import our device into Intune. So let's do that now. So the first thing we need to do is configure the tenant name. So in our case, that's cloudabledev.com, because we've assigned a proper TLD to this tenancy rather than just running cloudabledev.onmicrosoft.com. For the sake of 20 quid a year, it's just nice to have a proper domain name associated with a 365 tenancy. The other thing we need to do, I could run the script just as it is now, and it would import the device into Autopilot right under this existing one, absolutely fine. But what it wouldn't do is configure the group tag. So if you've gone down the first method with the ZTDID query, then this would work. The device would appear in here. It would be absolutely fine, no worries, and it would work with that query. But we don't want to do that because it's not going to let us differentiate between different groups within our organization. So we are going to specify group tag as well. And I'm going to specify a group tag of Autopilot, which is what I'm setting as the default user-driven group tag. This could be anything you want. You could call it IT or HR or accounts or finance or whatever you want. So let's run that. So what the script's going to do now is connect to the tenancy. So I should get an authentication box pop up in a second. It's going to want my credentials, and then it's going to import this device into Intune. So it might take a second or two to do what it needs to do. So here's the authentication box we were waiting for. So and before I get a flood of comments, I know that admin is not a good username to be using, but for the sake of this dev tenancy, it will get changed afterwards. But it's easy enough. It makes life easier for you guys and girls being able to see that I'm using a privileged account to do this. So the admin account was a global admin account. Doesn't need to be a global admin. Could be something with enough rights to Intune and to Azure AD. So it doesn't have to be global admin. It could be one of the other admin roles, but it does need rights across Intune and Azure AD. So that's worked exactly as we wanted it to. So order identifier group tag is set. Serial number, product keys, and import IDs all set, which is exactly what we want. So if I do a sync to the Intune enrollment service, the Autopilot service, what we should do in a second is that we should see our new device appearing in Intune. While that's happening, I'm just going to reset this. So I'm not going to do anything fancier than simply just hit the big reset button, reset this PC, because that's going to take a little while to go through what it needs to go through. That's going through the reset process. Let's refresh because I'm impatient. Has it appeared yet? No, it's not. So one of the things to remember is that the Autopilot enrollment service doesn't update instantaneously. It takes a little while. While I'm confident that the device has been imported successfully because we've seen it in this PowerShell script, we know it's been imported where it needs to be imported. It's not always reflected instantaneously. You find that you have to wait 5-10 minutes, do a sync with the service, and then there we go. That's configured as we wanted it to be configured. So the device has appeared. Let's make sure. 8439-31. So there we are. That's the device we wanted. The group tag is configured as we wanted. So the moment this device restarts, it's not going to ask us to configure a Microsoft account or anything like that. This device is now linked with our tenancy. The moment this device reinstalls and goes through the out-of-box wizard again, it's going to know that it's a Cloudable dev device, and it's going to ask us to sign straight in. So this could be a device that's drop shipped to a user, and they will sign in with my joe.blogs at Cloudable, or Cloudable dev in this case. And the moment they do that, this device is going to set itself up. Any applications we want to install will get installed. Anything else, any policies, device encryption, antivirus, all of that is just going to get configured straight out of the box. We don't need to see the device, we don't need to touch it, we just need to know which user it's going to be assigned to. Well, we don't necessarily need to know that, but if we do know that, we can do some setup ahead of time. So that's resetting. So while that's resetting, let's go through a few of the things that I've configured in Intune. So first thing I'll go through is device enrollment. So all of the autopilot settings are contained within this Windows enrollment option within autopilot. So one of the first things that I've done is I've enabled Windows Hello for Business. I'm a huge fan of Windows Hello. I think it's absolutely brilliant. The Face ID functions are great. The PIN is a great way of boosting security, but in a simple way, in a way that doesn't affect users. It's not onerous, it's not a pain in the backside. So I get a lot of questions about the PIN, sort of going, Jay, how can a 6-digit PIN be more secure than a 15-character password that we make all our users do, and we make them change it once a month? How can a 6-digit PIN that they don't have to change possibly be more secure than that? And the answer is simple. The Windows Hello is predicated on tying together the user and the device. So that 6-digit PIN that they set up only works on that device. So not like a password where if I get your password, I can take that password to another computer or to my house, or I could do a VPN or any kind of nefarious activity, use that password from anywhere I like, and bang, I'm in. That 6-digit PIN only works on that device, nowhere else. You can't take that PIN anywhere else. And to set up that 6-digit PIN, the device takes the user through MFA. So not only are we sure that the user who set up the PIN is who they say they are, because we've multi-factor authenticated them, but we have a PIN that is device specific that only works on that device. So when people sort of look at me quite incredulously and go, well, how can that 6-digit PIN be more secure than our password with numbers, letters, doodles and squirrel noises and sign language and everything else in it? It's quite simple. It's because that PIN only works on that device. If they have another device, they have another PIN that they can set up, absolutely fine. But the premise of Windows Hello is tying together the authentication chain. So it's not just a case of you need a password. You need a PIN and you need the device. And you could go further than that. You could say with the multi-factor authentication that's built into Windows Hello, with the multi-factor unlock, you can put in place all sorts of policies and say, okay, well, if a device is on our trusted network, then a PIN is enough. But if they're from home, if they're at Starbucks, or if they're at a remote site, actually, I want both the PIN and I also want a fingerprint or a Face ID or something else as well, because the device knows that it's not on a trusted network and therefore one-factor authentication is not enough. It's incredibly granular and it's great and it's incredibly secure, but in a way that doesn't clobber the user and make the experience really, really horrible. It's one of the other things that I tend to do when I set up Windows Hello is enable this box that says use security keys for sign-in. That allows FIDO tokens, FIDO2 tokens, so you can start using hardware keys. I can't do that on this setup because they're virtual machines, and because I'm using Hyper-V, I can't pass through USB devices to the VMs, but if I was using a VMware workstation or something like that, then I could demo this. But on a physical device, a laptop or a desktop, you could use a FIDO key. Some brands, for example, YubiKey or something like that. They're about £20 a pop. They work absolutely brilliantly, and again, Very, very simple to use. Anyway, back to the configuration. So I've set up Windows Hello. That was the first thing. The next thing is deployment profiles. Well, because we're using the order ID field, I've created two deployment profiles. One for Autopilot, which is our default one, which most devices will get assigned to, and the other is IT, because it might be that we want to assign different apps, or it might be that we want, again, a different version of Office. Maybe we want different updates. So for example, when it comes to Windows Updating Ring, the IT group are on the Windows Insider track, so they get all the Windows updates first. They get product updates first. If anything's going to go wrong, it goes wrong first for the IT group, and that gives them a chance to troubleshoot it properly and make changes to software before anyone who's on the semi-annual Windows update channel gets clobbered with updates that may or may not break things, depending on whether you've got some legacy software, anything like that. So let's drill into the Autopilot one. So there's nothing fancy about this. Anyone who's configured Autopilot before would know this. So I'll just edit this to show you. So we're using the user-driven mode. So the user-driven mode means that when the device boots out of the out-of-box experience, it's tied to our tenancy, but it doesn't necessarily know who the user is. So it's going to ask the user to sign in with their credentials. And the moment the user does that, this device is then tied to that user. So this works in scenarios where one user has one device. For example, I am an HR person. I have a laptop along with everyone else in HR. That's my laptop. No one else really logs into it. Then a user-driven deployment works absolutely fine. And there's another mode called self-deploying. That's far more for shared devices, where maybe you have one device but you have 5 users or 10 users, and that's something that I'll show in another video. Unfortunately, I can't show it with Hyper-V. It has to be on a dedicated box because it relies on the TPM attestation, and Hyper-V doesn't support that as of yet. So unfortunately, I can't do that demo on Hyper-V. What I can do is plug another box into my HDMI interceptor, and then that will allow me to show you what's going on the screen from a different computer. So we're using the user-driven mode, and we're going to do an Azure AD join as opposed to a hybrid join or anything else. Primarily in this reason because I don't have hybrid joins set up on the dev tenancy, but also I tend to prefer an Azure AD join. I find it cleaner. I tend to find that hybrid join for me is a bit of a last resort. I only tend to use it for clients if they've got legacy apps, stuff that's authenticating against not necessarily a UPM, but Windows logon name, SAM account name, that sort of thing, really old applications. And you do see it with some old line of business applications, and you just can't get away from it, unfortunately. They're not normally the kind of line of business applications that do that, are the kind of line of business applications that the client can't just ditch. They're ingrained into the organization. So unfortunately, you have to put up with that. Other things that we can configure are account options. Do we want to create a standard or administrator account when the user logs in? It's invariably standard. Do I want to allow white glove? Well, not for this profile, but some profiles, yes, by all means allow white glove. That allows Autopilot to essentially prep the box. So if you're deploying, let's say this box belonged to Stephen Strange, and we knew that ahead of time, we could white glove the box. So that would pre-provision all the policies and all the apps on the laptop we were sending to Stephen Strange, which would mean that his setup time would be quicker. I tend to shy away from white glove a little bit. I've got some colleagues that swear by it, but I tend to find it a bit hit and miss, and I take the view personally that if I'm going to send a device to a user, it needs to work. Now, if it takes 2 or 3 minutes longer because it's doing the policy application there and then when they turned it on as opposed to before, then that's fine so long as I know it's going to work. Whereas white glove, I'm not 100% convinced that it's reliable as it should be necessarily. The other things we can do are apply device name templates. So we're going to do that. CLDev dash and then serial number variable. So that's going to apply serial number from the machine. You can do a random number or something like that. But one of the things I found, one of the problems with the random number, was it doesn't check the random numbers to see whether it's used them before. So we found on one of the clients we did, and we had to change the serial number, that it was deploying devices and it was deploying the same number more than once. And that was suboptimal, shall we say, and we ended up going to serial number because we can guarantee that the serial number of the device is unique. So let's just save that, even though I've not made any changes to it. So that's our deployment profile. The other thing that you'll need to configure is the enrollment status page. So the enrollment status page is what the users see as they go through the autopilot process. So I've configured the enrollment status page in this case to show me the progress. I've configured a timeout of 5 minutes, which is probably artificially short, but it is artificially short. But just for the purposes of this demo, I've set the timeout to 5 minutes. It should probably be about 15 or 20 minutes. I'm going to show a custom message if a time limit is exceeded for whatever reason, and allow the users to provision anyway or to just go ahead even if it errors. I'm also going to force the installation of an application, which in this case is the company portal. I really like the company portal. That's a good way of pushing out custom apps to devices, but also it's a really good way of forcing a policy refresh if you need to on the fly. So I tend to make sure the company portal is there anyway, because if you need to make a policy change and you need then a user to update the policy more quickly than the average refresh, you can say, oh, just go into the company portal, click sync, and bang, policy is going to refresh. So let's come out of this. So while I've been talking about that, the device is reset. So we'll proceed with the United Kingdom. And the moment I do that, choose my keyboard, because this machine is a virtual machine, because it's got a network connection, it's just going to go ahead and go through the autopilot process. So you normally see the now we have some important setup to do. The box may or may not restart depending on what changes need to be done, and then it's going to go through the autopilot process. So that box is just restarting. While that's restarting, I will show you how we've got this configured. So I'm using policy sets within Intune. I used to end up doing a policy for every device group, but I found that it's easier and it just seems more intuitive to do a bunch of device policies for various scenarios. So in this case, these are all user driven, but I'd also do some self-deploying. These are base policies. These policies are good at every device, but there may be some specific ones that we do. And then I use device profiles or the device policy sets to cherry pick which of those policies I want to apply to a particular group. So I want to apply those policies. I want that device compliance policy. I want that autopilot profile, and we're assigning this lot to that dynamic device group. So our VM's restarted. So I'm going to sign in as one of our users. I'm going to sign in as Stephen Strange. So Stephen Strange at cloudabledev.com. So Stephen Strange has been with us for a little while. Let's see if I can remember what his password is. That's just a pre-generated password that I changed earlier. So that's now going to go and do some setup. And what we should see is the enrollment status page now. So that device should go and do some setup. So here we go. So that's going through its device preparation. So secured the hardware, great. Joined to the organization's network, great. Mobile management, great. Okay. So one of the things I can show you now is if I go back into Intune, let's go back into the device enrollment. Let's find that device again. So here we are. I believe it was the top one ending in -31. So let's have a look at that. And we can see that for this device, there is now an associated Intune object and an associated 0AD object. So the join has done what we needed it to do. and we will now find the policy will start going out to the device. So let's wait for this to go through and do what it needs to do. While that's going through, I'll just go through a couple of the policies. There's nothing really fancy about any of this. So what we've got is a device restriction policy, an endpoint protection policy. So let's just go into device restriction policy. So all of this is quite straightforward. Things like how do I want the App Store configured? How do I want the lock screen experience to look like? So let's go into that. For example, I want to block notifications when they're on the lock screen. I don't want people to be able to see email subjects and stuff like that as a device is on the lock screen. Password complexity. Again, that's not how I would set it up in production, but I've just required a password. So that's now completed both the device steps. That's going to restart. This was something I did quite quickly last night. Just did all the policy setup because, as most of us are working from home. To be fair, I got a little bit on the board side. So that's now going through the account setup. So what we'll probably find in a second is it's going to ask us to do Windows Hello setup. So that's just a message that displays. It doesn't have to display. That's part of the device restriction policy. So again, I could turn that off if I wanted. So that's in the logon screen behavior. So that's something else again that can be changed. Power settings, other things that can be changed. There are all sorts of behaviors that can be changed as part of this. Part of this is also driven from the endpoint protection policy. So again, there's various behaviors available on the endpoint protection policy. For example, there's the logon message. Do I want to do that or not? I could delete that if I wanted to get rid of the error, or not the error, but to get rid of the message. So let's log in. So now this device has started to pull some policy because I no longer have to use the full email address. It already knows the tenancy. I've asked it to pre-populate the last bit, so I can just log in with a username as opposed to a full email address. Again, it's a little thing, but I just find that it makes life a bit easier for some of the users. So that's now going to go through some setup. We should find that we get a Windows Hello registration in a second. It's going to ask us to choose a PIN. So if I was Stephen Strange, if I was a user, the IT department's, I'm self-isolating at home. IT have posted me that laptop. It's arrived via courier, DPD, whoever that may be, or UPS, insert courier here. I've turned it on. I've signed in with my Cloudable Dev ID, and now it's gone and done all the setup for me. So that's now going to go through. Now I've signed in again. It's going to do a few more security policies. It's going to do a few apps. The whole process takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then this device is ready to go. Don't need to do anything with it so far as me as an IT person is concerned. Stephen will be good to go, and he'll be able to read his email, collaborate on Teams, his OneDrive will be set up. All of that will start happening in a second. But one of the first things it's going to do is that there were a couple of apps that I selected that I said needed to go in before this enrollment status screen went away. So it's going to go ahead and do those apps now. It's just done the security policy, so it's just going to get through to the apps now. So this was the interactive logon policy. That's where that message was configured. So if I wanted to, I could get rid of those, and then that message wouldn't come up anymore. Let's just save that. So I'm not using very much in the way of custom policy. The only custom policy I have is to force a GMT time zone, because the computers do like defaulting to American time. So I tend to force a GMT in the policy. It makes life easier. So we're going to set up a Windows Hello PIN now. So it's going to take me through the MFA process, or I can say it's going to take Stephen Strange through the MFA process. So his phone number was already in Azure AD, so it's sent a text, which has just arrived. So let's put that in. So the device has MFA'd me now, so it knows that I am who I say I am. So I've authenticated with both my password, and I've authenticated now with a one-time PIN that's sent through SMS. So I'm going to create a PIN for this device. And I can use this PIN, it's a 6-digit PIN. I can use this rather than a password to sign into the device, or if we configure the multi-factor unlock, I can configure a whole bunch of other things as well. So we're at the desktop. So I've signed in, it's applied some policy, we're at the desktop. And then what we're going to find now is it may take a couple of minutes, but things are going to start appearing. Line of business applications that we normally use are going to install. Outlook's going to appear, Office 365 is going to appear, or Office Pro Plus I should say. Microsoft Teams will appear. Going to update the Microsoft Edge to the new version of Edge, and a few other bits and bobs. So let's see. So at the moment, very much out of box, although Company Portal has appeared, which was one of the applications that we said we wanted to install straight off the bat. And what we'll find is that some of these Windows default applications are going to remove themselves as well, because I've asked Intune to remove them, and some other things are going to install. The other great thing about Company Portal is that what we can do is that we can publish apps for our users. So if we wanted to provide Google Chrome or something like that, then a user could just click on that, install Google Chrome, and bang, it's installed on the machine. They don't need admin rights, they don't need anything else, and we could provision line of business apps this way, or optional apps. Maybe they need 7-zip, maybe they need Firefox, maybe they need AutoCAD's DWG TrueView. So I'm going to go in while this is just doing its thing in the background. A few things are setting up. OneDrive is doing what it's doing. While this is doing what it's doing, I will show you how those apps are configured, how we're pushing line of business applications down. So OneDrive has just auto-configured itself. Not only has it auto-configured and locked itself to Cloudable Dev's tenancy, it has also silently redirected the user's desktop, documents folders, and everything else to OneDrive. So that means that if the user had any files in OneDrive, it's automatically pulled down straight to the device. So anything Stephen Strange now creates on his desktop, in his documents, in his pictures, that's automatically backed up and synced to OneDrive and accessible on any corporate device. But there's also some security involved here that will now only connect this device to Cloudable Dev tenancy. So if he tried to add his personal OneDrive account in, it wouldn't work. If he tried to connect to another organization's OneDrive, it wouldn't work. So the OneDrive auto configuration is something that I find really helpful. And it's something that I will show you briefly because it's incredibly easy to set up. So I've just done it using the administrative templates here. It can be done in other ways. It could be done using the GPO import. That's how it used to be done before administrative templates came along. Or before that, it was even done via PowerShell. But the administrative templates are the way to go. So I'm not particularly worried about the error here because I've been messing around with this, getting it the way I want it. And that's probably not updated for this device yet. But I will check back in on it later. So we're going to drop into Office. And we're going to find some OneDrive policies. And we can see from here how I've configured this. So I've locked OneDrive here to this tenant ID. I've also told it that I want to continue syncing even when battery saver mode is turned on, because in my view, I want everything that's on the device synced up to OneDrive and Office 365. I don't want the potential for a device on battery saver mode maybe to be dropped and for any potential for the user to lose some work. If they do drop the device and it's destroyed, then I can just give them a new device, and the moment they sign in, all of their documents are going to come flooding back down. So it works really well. So we're going to silently move their known folders to OneDrive. Again, it requires the tenant ID. And if you're wondering, well, how do I find the tenant ID? One of the things I will show you is if you just go into Azure AD, go to Properties, and again, the Directory ID field here, that's the value you need. That's the tenant ID. So we're going to show the notification when we've redirected the folder. Probably 9 times out of 10 I wouldn't bother to show this notification, but I'm doing it for the purposes of this demo so that you can see that I've made a change to the machine. So we're going to use files on demand, and we're going to silently sign users in with their current credentials. So that is what made OneDrive just sign in using the user's username, signed in straight away, no interaction, no enter your username, enter your password, any of that rubbish. Just configures itself silently and off it goes. We're going to use files on demand. Files on demand is a great setting, very good at optimizing disk space locally, but basically it means that it's only going to download files on demand. So all the files are going to live in 365, they're going to live in the user's OneDrive space, because all the users have effectively got unlimited OneDrive space in Office 365. The default configuration comes with a terabyte per user, but it's effectively unlimited. So why pay for that space on-prem? Why pay for that space to be on file servers on-prem when it can be in OneDrive? You're already paying for it as part of your 365 license. It's nice to have it up there. You know it's backed up. You know that you're not going to lose a device and lose a shed ton of company data if a device is stolen or run over or dropped down the toilet or whatever happens to it. So that's all configured. That was how I did the OneDrive configuration. I've also done something similar with Outlook. I've told Outlook that I want to do the same, that I want it to configure the default profile on first launch automatically. I don't want any messages for the user. I don't want it to mess around. So let's have a look. Let's see if Outlook is in yet. No, Office 365 is still installing, so that's going to take a couple of minutes. So we'll wait for that to happen. While that's doing its thing, I will show you how the applications are configured, which is under Client Apps within Intune. So we're just going to go to Apps. And we can see here that I've got some apps that are assigned. So Company Portal, that was the main one we talked about. So that's installed. And if we go to its properties, we can see that it's required for the following groups. So this is a Microsoft Store app. So what I've done is within Intune, within the Client Apps, let's go back into Client Apps, there's an option here for Microsoft Store for Business. So this, if I click into this, this will go through to the Cloudable Dev Microsoft Business Store. I might need to sign in. In theory, it should single sign me on. There we go, straight away. So this is the Cloudable Dev Store. So any apps that I buy appear in here. So I've bought a few apps, which have, well, I say bought in inverted commas. The apps are free, so I haven't actually paid for them, but you in effect have to buy them even though they're free so that they appear in the store. So there were a few that I purchased, things like Company Portal, even though it's free. But the reason that you bring them into the Cloudable Dev Business Store is that when you do that, this is then synced to Intune. So the moment you click buy, 10 minutes later, these apps appear here, and I can assign them, I can install them, or in some cases, things like the Groove Music app, I actually want that uninstalled. I don't particularly want it on corporate devices. So I've purchased, in inverted commas, that app. That's brought it into the Cloudable Dev Microsoft Store. But if I go into Intune and have a look, let's go to the properties and again uninstall all devices. So that app gets ripped out from all devices. So let's see if Intune has ripped it out of this device. Yep, there is no Groove Music. And that start menu looks a lot prettier than last we saw it as well. So there are a few things going on. OneNote has come down, which is what we wanted. OneDrive is there. Let's have a look at the Task Manager, and you'll probably find that this is doing things in the background. So let's have a look. So we've got Office Click to Run service. We should probably find that there are a few other things going on in the background. Some installer processes. What I will do though, is go into the Company Portal just to hurry it along a bit, and let's hit sync. That's going to force the device to check back into Intune, and things that would have happened in the next 5 minutes are just going to happen quicker. So that's going to now start bringing some more applications down through. So we're installing apps then here in a number of different ways. So Groove Music that we talked about, Company Portal, then Microsoft Store for Business apps. So they're purchased in the Store for Business. That brings them into Intune and I can deploy the apps that way. Office 365 deployment is baked in to Intune. So when you come to deploy Office 365, you can simply say, I want a new Windows 10 Office 365 suite, and then choose the products that you want, and that will go in once you've assigned it to a group. Now again, this is another reason why we are subdividing by using the order ID field to give us different groups. Because as part of this installation, I've configured Microsoft Access, Outlook, PowerPoint, Teams, all of that kind of stuff. Chances are very few people need Microsoft Access or need Microsoft Publisher. We'd probably only publish Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint and Teams to 90% of our user base. But the finance or accounts users probably need Access. IT probably needs Access. Maybe the marketing people need Publisher, but not everyone needs Publisher. So again, maybe some people need the 32-bit version, not the 64-bit version. Finance, great example. Chances are there's an accounts package that needs an Office plugin because they've got ODBC lookups to loads of linked tables and all that kind of stuff. So chances are we need the 32-bit version of Office for the finance people rather than 64-bit version. And again, because we've got multiple groups, it's not one size fits all. Maybe we want a different update channel for some users. Again, that can all be done. So that's Office 365. Other things that we're deploying, Microsoft Edge. So I might think that's a little bit weird why you deploy Microsoft Edge, but this is Edge 77, which is the new version of Edge. It's the Chromium version of Edge, and I think quite a lot better than the previous version. So I've been pushing this to computers now for a little while. It works very well. Time's gone by, you used to have to package it up a bit, but now again, this is baked into Intune. You can simply deploy Edge version 77. That will create you a new profile. You can assign that to a number of different groups, whatever groups that you want. So those are the sort of common applications. We've got Microsoft Store for Business apps. We've got the stuff that's baked in, Office Pro Plus, Microsoft Edge. What about other stuff? What about the Chrome and the Firefox that was in the company portal? Well, that's being deployed slightly differently. That's being deployed via what's called an application called Chocolatey. Now, Chocolatey is package manager, open source, also has some paid versions for Windows. It works really, really well. When you come to rolling out applications, there's a couple of different ways you can do these Windows 32-bit apps. Although I appreciate some of them are 64-bit apps, even though they're Win32 apps. You can upload the MSIs to Intune. So for example, I could say, let's do a line of business app. I could then choose an MSI or anything along those lines, upload that and deploy it to clients, maybe with a couple of install switches, things like, /silent or /s or /quiet or whatever switch it is that the MSI needs so that it goes in. Again, it's going to vary per app. But some apps are a bit difficult. AutoCAD DWG Viewer, it's not a bad application, but what it does have is prerequisites. So you could, by all means, upload the AutoCAD MSI file into line of business applications, but I guarantee you it's not going to install. It might get so far, but it might then suddenly discover that you need the Visual Studio redisks, or you need a Windows update, or you need something else, and at which point the whole process is just going to fall down. So that's why I use Chocolatey. That's one of the reasons I use Chocolatey. The other reason I use Chocolatey is keeping these apps up to date. So I could upload a Firefox MSI to this application here. I can configure that. That uploads whatever version of the MSI it is that I've downloaded. But apps like Firefox and Chrome and Adobe Reader and other really common line of business applications, they're updated quite regularly. You can guarantee that within a month, it's going to be a newer version. Now, if you uploaded this via MSI, you've now got to go to the vendor, you've got to go to Adobe, you've got to go to Mozilla or whoever it is, you've got to get the new version of the MSI, and you've now got to upload that version of the MSI into Intune, which is fine if you've got 1 or 2 apps. If you've got 50 apps, if you've got 50 line of business apps that every month you're going to go and check for a new version of that application, download the new version of the application, upload it into Intune, and then push out, it's a nonsense. It's either not going to happen or you're going to end up pulling your hair out doing it. So again, that's why we use Chocolatey, because Chocolatey is not only going to take care of the installing of the application, it's going to take care of updating them for us too. And that's where the real power of that sort of thing comes in. So we're deploying Chocolatey. Let's go into the properties. So to deploy these apps, these are the Win32 apps, you get what's called a .intune win file. So if I find that, let's find the Chocolatey one. So this is my tools folder. It's got installers that I've been creating for various different Windows applications. So everything that you do as a 32-bit app in Intune, you need an install.intune win file. Now, all that install.intune win file is in this case is a PowerShell script. So that Intune win file simply contains a PowerShell script. If I look at that PowerShell script, it is simply the install PowerShell script here from Chocolatey that goes and grabs the file out of the Chocolatey website and installs it. So I'm using the Intune Win32 content tool, which is here. And I'm using that simply to package up the Intune Win file. And when it comes to the application itself, the install command, it's simply PowerShell.exe. We'll bypass the execution policy, and we'll call the /install.ps1, which is that file there. That then installs Chocolatey on the machine and allows us to do a bunch of other things at the same time. So one of the other really good things about using Intune, as that I mentioned earlier, is that you don't need a machine to be on your physical LAN to be able to push policy to it, to be able to update it, to be able to see if it's compliant or not. That's one of my favorite ones, is the software updating, is that you can push different rings to different devices. And again, this is done at a device level. So I can set up my IT devices to behave differently to my normal devices. So for normal users, I'll let them defer feature updates for up to 2 weeks. I let them defer quality updates for 5 days. But IT devices, I want feature updates and quality updates to be in before all the other users. I want IT devices to experience a problem before any normal devices experience a problem, e.g. accounts or engineering or HR or whoever your business area is. But one of the other good things that you can do as part of this, something that's a little less known, if I go back to the device configuration, is that you can do what's called delivery optimization, which is baked into Windows 10. So delivery optimization is how a computer will actually go and get its Windows updates. So Windows 10 devices have got the ability to peer updates with each other. So in this case, I've created a policy that says that if you're a Windows 10 device, and if you exist behind the same NAT as another Windows 10 device, and that device has already got a copy of an update that you need, then by all means go and get the update from that device rather than get the information from the internet. So if you've got 50 or 100 devices behind the same NAT, those devices will happily go and get updates from each other rather than go out to the internet across restricting your bandwidth, costing you money potentially if it's a metered connection, if that's the kind of thing you're doing. But the other great thing about this is that you can then say, okay, I want you to peer, or I want you to go out to the internet, but I only want you to use a percentage of total available bandwidth. And again, that can all be configured as part of these delivery optimizations. Okay, I want you to cache, but I only want you to cache so much. Maybe we'll configure a caching server. So this is very much WSUS-like functionality, but without the ability to selectively pick an update and then just release that update. So it's more automated than that, and Windows 10 will go and get the updates that it needs, and that could include BIOS updates or driver updates, depending on what it is you need. But if another device behind the same NAT needs the same update, then it's going to peer rather than go out to the internet, which again is quite nice. It saves you some bandwidth and other things as well. So let's go back to our client now. I've just restarted this. Again, Microsoft Edge has cleaned itself up, which is great. So we've got things like Office 365 all installed now. I've not yet launched Outlook, so let's see if Outlook configures itself. I've not yet tested this policy on this environment. Normally I quite like being able to test before I demo something. But let's just launch it and see what happens. Normally, if it's not going to pick up the primary SMTP address, it throw you a wizard at this point and say, oh, welcome to Outlook. Please select your account, next, that kind of thing. It looks like it's not going to do that. It's already going straight into loading profile. So it already knows who Stephen Strange is. And what it's going to do is it's just going to configure. It's not going to ask him to next, choose your email address, all of that kind of rubbish. It's just automatically configured, setting up the local copy of his email. It's just great that that works as it should do. So those are some emails that were generated earlier from Nestor, who's another demo account. So all of this data, all of this demo data is automatically populated. So when you create an MSDN tenancy, you can actually ask it to pre-populate a whole bunch of demo data. So here we come, the meeting invites and that kind of thing. So that's all done and dusted, which is absolutely great. So that is a quite quick demo. Microsoft Teams would still deploy. I haven't actually configured Microsoft Teams deployment yet properly, but I obviously have on one of the other machines because that's why the desktop shortcut is there. But that's just a quick demo of how many policies have I created? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 policy objects in Intune, a couple of dynamic groups, and a couple of lines of PowerShell just to get these machines into Autopilot. I could use this to deploy 50, 100, 500 devices, drop ship them, speak to your whoever it is you get laptops from or desktops. So whether that's you go into a vendor direct like Lenovo or Dell or HP, or maybe you're using an Ingram or a Tech Data or something like that. Speak to them, say, okay, I'm going to order 500 laptops from you, but I want these laptops autopiloted, and I want them autopiloted to this tenancy with this group tag. Shouldn't cost you anything. You could drop ship those laptops straight to the users, and the moment they sign in, they've got their Outlook pre-configured. They've got Office Pro Plus installed. We could go to the company portal. We could install any other line of business application we decide to put in here. We can automatically install. You just click on that, install, off we go. And I'll do another video showing you how to package up these applications, because at the moment, just in this demo tenancy, I just put Chrome and Firefox. But when we come to look at other stuff, for example, let me go back to my tools folder. Could be anything. Could be FileZilla, could be GIMP, which is a great image manipulation program, ImageBurn, LastPass, Microsoft Teams, all of that kind of stuff. It works really well. But what I will do, Microsoft Teams is a good example because I've not yet configured it. So let us have a look at the PowerShell script that I'm using. So this is the PowerShell script to install Microsoft Teams. So all it's doing is calling Chocolatey, having a look. Does Microsoft Teams exist? Okay, if it does, we'll do an upgrade. If it doesn't, we'll do an install. So what I will do, just to show you how this works, is I will run PowerShell on this machine we've just configured. I'm going to run it as an administrator, just so you can see what's going on. So here we go. Running PowerShell as administrator. So you don't normally see this process because it's all happening back behind the scenes. But if you were watching Task Manager very carefully, what you would see when someone clicks on the icon in the company portal is you'd see Chocolatey suddenly appear, maybe a couple of shim processes, and then the application would just appear. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this command manually just to show you what actually happens. So the -Y switch at the end, all the -Y switch does is essentially a yes switch. So if I ran this command without the yes switch, it would get about halfway through and then go, are you really sure you want to install this? And you just go yes or all, depending on what it is. But with the -Y switch, it's not going to prompt me. So what happens now we're running this command, Chocolatey is going to go out. It's going to grab the installer for Teams from Microsoft. Here it goes, statistics.teams.microsoft.com, grab the installer, brought it down locally. It's going to install. And it's going to fail. How about that? Why did it fail? Failed because the version that of Teams I was trying to install there was the standalone installer rather than, so Office 365 is a bit funny. So you can't coexist click to run version of Office 365 alongside a version that you've deployed, alongside maybe a volume license version. So for example, I've seen a lot of organizations where they deploy Office 365 via click to run, or they push it down via Intune, but they've got volume license copies of Visio or Project. Those two don't coexist. So what you end up finding is that you have to convert your Project and your Visio licenses to 365 licenses. And if you've just bought them, then that is potentially a problem. So that was a bad example. So what I'll do is change this to Firefox instead. That's because I've pushed Office 365 via Intune and then tried to do a manual install of Teams, whereas Teams is baked into the 365 packaging now. So it's gone and got Firefox. Let's see what happens. Downloaded, installing. So what should happen in a second is we get a Firefox icon on the desktop, and there we go. But just as an example, I just wanted to show you what was happening behind the scenes. So when that installer is called, when someone clicks Firefox and they click install, what it's doing is running that line of PowerShell on the client. And then Chocolatey will go out, we'll get Firefox, we'll download it. If the prerequisites required, it'll install the prerequisites. It's still going through the install process at the moment. And that's the great thing about it. The other great thing about this is that when it comes to updating, but that's a video that I will show at a later time. So we'll just wait for this install process to complete. If we go back to our task manager, here we go, downloading, installing. So now that's installing. What we should see, there we go, it's too quick for me, it's installed anyway. What you would normally see is a Chocolatey process here doing what it does. But that's installed. So Firefox, does it run? Yep, here's Firefox. Welcome to the new version. So that's just a very quick demo, and again, you can package pretty much any application you want up. These are most of the common ones. Things like Telegram, Sublime Text, WhatsApp, FileZilla, Google Earth, all of that kind of stuff. Any line of business apps. If you've got any internal applications that you maybe don't want pushed up to the central Chocolatey distribution, You can create what's called a chocolatey server, either on-prem or in Azure, which is just an IIS server, which can hold your own internal repos. So if you've got custom applications that you only use internally, if you don't want those published externally, you can do an internal repo, or internal in inverted commas, could be located anywhere. And you can tell the clients to go out to that repo rather than the public internet one. So that's just a quick demo of Intune in general. Little cobbled together because I think I put this demo together about 12 o'clock last night when I got a little bit bored and had a glass or two of red wine. So just thought I'd show you, for those of you that are struggling, for those of you who are thinking, oh my God, we've got a whole workforce that used to be in the office and are now trying to work from home, and how do we configure things, and how do we configure all of these laptops, and is there an easy way of doing it, especially if you've already got 365 license? The answer to that is yes. Will it work in all scenarios? No. Sometimes, I quite like doing this without VPNs or anything like that. But maybe you've got legacy file shares, and maybe you have to get a VPN configured. But again, if you're configuring profiles in Intune, let's go to Windows 10 profiles, you can actually use Intune to set up, let's call this Corp VPN. I can use Intune to configure the VPN for me. So I can create the connection in here, however we're going to do this. Depends what vendor we're using. Maybe we're using Palo Alto, maybe we've got Global Protect, or using a checkpoint or a sonic wall, or whatever the case may be, or just a standard IKE v2 or point-to-point tunneling protocol VPN. And more than just establishing the connection, we can also then associate certain applications or certain IP ranges with that connection, so we can do a split tunnel. So Office 365 is a really good example here. A lot of people configure their VPN and they will backhaul all their internet traffic via the VPN. But that's great. But if you've just told all of your staff that you want to be using Microsoft Teams and you're going to be using Exchange Online, the last thing you want to be doing is backhauling all that traffic back to your corporate network to then just break out from your corporate network, because the performance is going to be shocking. The latency that you will bring into applications like Microsoft Teams by not split tunneling will be pretty horrendous for your users, and they'll start shouting quite quickly. So the best way to do it is by telling Intune, telling the configuration, I want you to use a VPN only for these specific IP ranges, only for these specific apps, and I want that traffic to go down the VPN, and everything else I want to fire straight out to the internet. And that way you still get your performance on your SharePoint, your Exchange Online, your Teams, your Skype, while allowing corporate apps to work. So that, again, you can configure DNS servers, split tunneling, all of that kind of thing. So you can configure internal DNS resolution as part of the VPN. That's a VPN that will happen on demand, so the users are never aware. They never need to set this up. They don't need to put in passwords. They don't need to faff around. This VPN will just establish itself the moment the computer's got an internet connection. So again, you can leverage Autopilot and Intune even if you need a VPN because you've got a line of business apps or shared drives or whatever the case may be that demand it. You can use Intune to provision that for you. So that's about it for now. If there's anything you'd like to see in a future video, please give me a shout. I'd be more than happy to do it. Hopefully, again, if there are any questions, any comments, any things you want to know, then put something in the comments. By all means, we can either jump on a call or we can do another video. If you're watching this on YouTube, then a like and a subscribe would be great, and hopefully there'll be many more videos to come. Thanks very much.